Your City of Fairhope Development Review Committee. I am Buford King, the Interim Director of Planning and Zoning. And so this meeting is a meeting for staff and for applicants of development projects. And the items that we will discuss today will be considered or reviewed by the Planning Commission on July 1st of this year. This is, the public is invited to sit in this meeting as well as to watch. This is not a public hearing, so we do not answer questions from the public, but it is made available to the public so they are aware of development activities. So we'll begin with item ZC 19.08, Zulu Charlie 19.08. And this is regarding the Greeno Road Corridor Overlay District. And what I'll do here is just take a moment to review what we've done, what your City of Fairhope staff has done. We first discussed this item informally at the May 6th Planning Commission meeting to introduce not to introduce the document, but just to introduce the subject to the Planning Commission and to the public that corridor overlay was being prepared. And it's a response to the visual preference survey that was conducted last year. So we discussed it informally on May 6th. We also discussed it during the Mayor's Directors Roundtable on May 29th, mentioned it very briefly during the City Council work session on May 29th, and actually reviewed a document for the first time at the most recent June 3rd Planning Commission meeting for review. The Planning Commission did not act upon that document. They did review it during a work session, and we also discussed it a bit more during the meeting itself. We did conduct a public hearing to solicit public comment, and we thank those who joined us for the meeting and also commented. This update is to advise that this afternoon, today is June 10th, we're also having a City Council meeting, which means we also have both a work session as well as another Mayors and Directors Roundtable. I'll talk about that during the roundtable for a few minutes more to talk about two more of the districts and also provide a more detailed update of that process. But for the public to be aware, we will have another document for review by the Planning Commission on July 1st for that Greeno Road corridor. And so with that said, we'll move on to item number ZC 19.09.
So ZC 19.09 is a request for a Neil Vera, which I do not see here this evening. Is anybody here for this ZC 19.09, rezoning of 303 Fells? With that said, I'll touch on it briefly. What it is, it's a zoning request for the property located at 303 Fells. It's currently zoned R2, and the request is to rezone it to B2, which is the general business district. It's located in the CBD and is adjacent to currently B1 zoning district. Staff's recommendation at this time for the initial review is probably going to be to the Planning Commission to request it to be to B1 as opposed to B2. The purpose for the rezoning is to use the property for a real estate office. The use for real estate office is allowed in B1 as well as B2. And the B1 district, there is a little corridor, a little strip that continues north, and this whole section is on the edge of the central business district. So keeping in line with what is currently zoned there, staff's recommendation will be to rezone it to B1 as opposed to B2. And Mr. Neil Vera will receive an email with this information as well. And if he has any questions or comments, he can get with me on that. And then we will hear this on the Planning Commission meeting on July 1st.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
Mike, I have one question. Is it between Church and Section Street?
It's right
on this little agenda thing. It's got between Fells and Section. Is that?
It's kind of it's really on the corner of, closer to the corner of Fells and Church Street. It's not in between. It's in between Church and Section.
Right.
On the north side of Fells Avenue. Here's.
Church.
Okay.
That's all I was.
The typo, right? Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a typo too.
Typo on the agenda.
Have a typo in the agenda for item ZC 19.09. So that should be Church Street. Okay, any other questions from staff? Okay, well, we'll move on to item ZC 19.10.
ZC 1910 is another rezoning case. Request is from Provision Investments LLC to rezone a piece of property located on the corner of Windmill and 181. Did you receive an email with a letter about the rezoning from me, or did you not receive? I looked back at my emails and I thought I'd sent it. Well, here's a copy of what I had sent.
Okay.
And it's basically saying that our initial review of the area is consistent with the request for the rezoning. There's currently the property, as I mentioned, is on the corner of 181 and Windmill. It's currently zoned R2, has residential agriculture to the north. To the east side, there is a recently rezoned piece of property from R2 to the B4. To the south, there's a commercial PUD that has a mixed use or a multi-use of residential and of commercial use of office use. Then on the other corner, there is currently a restaurant, which is on unzoned property, and south of that is another provision storage with office buildings out front. So that initial review looks like staff's recommendation is going to be for approval for the rezoning to B4. Did you have any particular questions or anything for staff?
Sounds good.
All right. And then during the course review, I'll send that via email as well to you. And if you have any other questions or have anything, I'll contact you via email. And just let me know if there's anything else that I can help you with.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay, so moving on to item ZC 19.11, and this is a case handled by Ms. Nancy Milford, and she had a conflicting appointment this morning that could not be rescheduled. She is going to try to join us in progress, so we will move that item to the rear of the agenda pending her arrival. If she's not able to join us this morning, then staff that's here right now will certainly collect questions from the applicant. So with that said, we'll move on to item ZC 19.12, the Bung property, and give it back to Mr. Jeffries. Good morning,
Good morning.
everyone.
All right. As Beaver mentioned, this is another rezoning case. This is located on the west side of Section Street. It's a currently zoned M1, and the request is to rezone it to a planned unit development, or a PUD, a PUD. We did have, after initial review, just a few concerns. One, which I know I sent you the cover letter addressing some of the items that we kind of saw that jumped out at front at us. The first being where FEMA's flood maps show that the floodway is actually located further into the property, in contrast to where the actual topographic survey shows where a gully is. And I understand that you guys are in the process of applying for a LOMA with FEMA to get that flood map amended. And that's the biggest issue. And until we can actually have that amended, currently with the floodway here, and Eric can help me out a little bit better with the conditions of the floodway being there, but it's essentially that area can't be developed because it's in a floodway, as I know that you're aware. So until we'll hold this off, and then once we get information back from FEMA saying that yes, we're going to be able to amendment, and we know that that's going to be finalized, then we'll be able to proceed with the plan that is in place now.
So you guys don't think we can move forward? Does anybody not agree that it's in an error? That's, I guess, the first thing. If we all agree it's an error, could we not move forward?
I don't know that I necessarily agree it's an error. It may not be mapped entirely. I can tell you this. We had new maps issued on April 19. Okay, that's when the new maps went effective. From an accuracy standpoint, they're probably the most accurate maps we've had. Now, I'm not going to speak to this specific location, but also I know that in the last year and a half, I've had 3 different properties where LOMAs have been proposed, and some of them, it was very clear the actual channel goes here, but the flood map says here. FEMA denied all 3 of them. I haven't had a Lomas, and the applicant submitted it, and then it goes to Atlanta for evaluation. I just think that it would be in everybody's best interest to have that process done. It's not really us you have to convince, it's FEMA. But until they accept it, it is what it is on the map right now. That's going to be your biggest hurdle. And, you know, you've dealt with FEMA before. They love to sit in their office in Atlanta and tell you where it's going to flood in Fairhope, Alabama. But that process needs to happen first. Because I know there's been one in particular. It was crystal clear that the channel was in a different location than where the map showed. And the engineers submitted all of the data. I was pretty sure, I thought it would be approved, and it was denied. So, and especially with new maps coming in, I would be interested to see what they have to say. I don't think it's a sure thing by any means.
There's a 20-foot gully there, and for them to
I
not say
fully
that-
understand. I know. Well, and I'll give you the example. It's at the end of Dogwood, where that subdivision is. You can clearly see, and it's been channelized. There's actually now a concrete flume. Then it shows precisely where that channel is. Well, the map showed it wandering halfway into the lot that's right there on the left-hand side when you come in. And it was pretty clear. I mean, you know, that's where the water went, and FEMA denied it. So that is the biggest hurdle from our standpoint. The rest of the comments on the design and everything else, Mike, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I mean, we were very intrigued by the design and what you're trying to do.
The overall concept.
Yeah, the concept is really
unique and
good.
meets
I think it's an interesting concept, and I just think, you know, it could go very well. But I just personally, in my dealings with FEMA, that's got to be done first, and that's also generally not a quick process. I mean, you're looking at 3 to 6 months probably to get word back on that.
Our client is a elderly resident
Mm-hmm.
of Fairhope who's lived in the house like probably, 50 years?
Yes, ma'am.
And really needs to sell this property.
Yeah.
And the people I have that are helping me with this development, we may lose them if we don't get some sort of preliminary approval through Fairhope, even while we're waiting on the FEMA process.
Unfortunately, with being through FEMA, it's a federal regulated.
Yeah.
Where it,
Right.
we can do lots of,
Understand.
we do several, conditions of approval, but with this being not even state, but federal regulated, if this was to go through, we wouldn't have any way of approving
Well,
it with
and hold on.
conditions. It kind of is
Understand.
beyond the extent of that.
So your
Understood.
other option would be, and I'm going to let y'all answer, if you want to get approval minus lots 7, 8, 9, and 10, because until you have a LOMA, those lots are unusable. So that would be an approval minus those 4 lots.
Right, so yeah, it could be redrawn to reflect where FEMA shows it, to where the lot still met the criteria. If it got, let's just go into the future, if it got approved as a PUD for the new drawing, and then if the LOMA got approved down the road, then the new owners or whoever could then try to go back through the planning commission and city council to amend the PUD to add lots that were consistent with the drawing that's now. But it's still not a easy, quick process. And then the number of lots that's in your overall development would change. And I don't know if you guys would be something that you'd have to talk about and see if that design or whatever would work for you guys.
But you'd essentially have an area reserved for future development pending feedback from FEMA.
And understand from our standpoint, I do not disagree with you on what you're thinking, where that line should be. I generally agree. It's not up to the city. We don't really have any say on it. What they're going to do is you're going to have to do all of the hydrologic study and send it to FEMA. They're going to evaluate it, and then if they accept it, they'll send me a copy of the letter of map amendment listing it. The other thing that we had come up when the April 19 maps went effective, there were a bunch of LOMAs and LOMAR Fs that had been done over the years on the 07 maps. They were all negated. All of them went away when the new maps came out. So everybody's kind of starting from a new canvas with the new map. You're the first one that I've had approach me about, doing a LOMA since the new maps were issued.
Have you been party to or seen anyone do an ELOMA?
I have not.
supposed to be a 3-day process, but, you know.
I would be interested to see that process.
I think our only hope had been that we could move forward on the PUD, because that does not give us the ability to do any construction. Obviously, we have to come back with a preliminary plat to actually get a subdivision approval before we can go to construct. So I think that was part of our thinking, that if we could get a master plan approved, knowing that we got there, knowing that we got to go through the process, then obviously maybe we couldn't submit a preliminary plat for the actual construction of the site until we had that part done. So that was kind of our process for moving forward with just getting the master plan approved. I think that would give Cheryl and her client some comfort that at least the city is good with the plan. I mean, I would like to think, I'm like y'all, I mean, this is just a unique layout.
It really
It's
is, yeah.
It's a good project for the area, but to keep moving on it, that's kind of that was our thinking, so.
So what would that be, Steve? We'd approve it with a condition of Loma
Yeah.
approval or something like that?
I mean, that's what I would, I mean, we do conditions all the time. I've not heard a restriction just because it's a federal thing. To me, it would just be the city would just say, hey, we'll approve it, but you can't move forward with it until you get that Loma out of the way.
Would
But-
you, and Buford, help me out, just kind of thinking, could you not move forward with the design minus lots 7, 8, 9, and 10, and then if the Loma's approved, then come back, could they amend it at that time?
Well, it's not just lots 7, 8, 9, and 10. It's also the entire entrance off
Oh,
of Section
okay.
Street
Yep.
is entirely in the floodway. So then we're access there, then the access for the PUD
Okay.
that would only exist, you know, if it could be moved further down, which then there's also the lift station. So there's lots of things start popping up where that floodway is
Well, the flood-
located.
you know, the
And I don't see if the planning commission and the city council, I don't know if they would even approve it if staff level were to put a condition of approval on it, which, you know, like you said, we put lots of conditions of approval on things to let them get through. And they're typically something that is fairly insignificant that can be altered with maybe just a text amendment or something on a plat, or a little bit of information that can be sent later that is just, we know it's going to be there. With this, could be approved with the possibility of it never being able to be developed for the intent that the PUD is intended for. So now we have a PUD that is unique in design and it meets the characteristics, but if it can't fully function as it was ever designed for.
Eric, the other cases you're referring to, were they floodways or
Yes.
were they flood zones?
No, they were floodways.
Which bothers me, because the FEMA maps themselves clearly state that the floodway is intended to be over the stream.
Yeah,
It's so clear that.
I know, I
this
can-
is so erroneous that.
Yeah, and in talking with my fellow building officials in the county, because everybody got the maps at the same time, I'm not sure, we're kind of unique in that, us in the county, maybe Daphne, that we have riverine and we have coastal, you know. The thing that I'm hearing in talking with them is because they produce the new maps with LiDAR, most of the areas are fairly accurate. This one I might take issue with, maybe one or two others as far as channel location. But it's really, we're not the ones you have to convince.
I know.
You know, and
Yeah.
I don't, you know, I don't know what we could necessarily do. I could talk to them and find out. I don't know who my new contact is at Region 4. But once you submit it, you know, we would be happy to have discussions with them, but it's really going to base down to your no-rise certification or your hydrologic study to show that the creek is actually, or the flow area is in a different area.
And to be honest, I wouldn't even be here asking any of this if I thought either of you thought this is not erroneous. I mean, to me, it's so obvious. I understand it's not you that we have to
Sure,
convince.
sure.
But it makes it a lot easier if I'm looking at people that agree with me and say, yeah, this is a terrible mistake.
Right.
We still have to go through the process.
Yes.
But if you told me, no, I'm not sure I agree with you, then obviously I got a problem even with you guys. I'm really have to back up.
Yeah.
But this is pretty bad.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where this is a process, a step that has to be taken that's really not done at our level. From like everybody said, from a concept standpoint, it's a really interesting development, and we see a lot of positives. We had a real discussion about it in the meeting, and there were a lot of things we liked about it. That's just a real big stepping stone.
And we do function without that entrance, don't we? Do we function without that entrance there, just with the use
Not
of center
entirely,
lane?
because one of the big concepts for development is the alleyway that circles the entire
Okay.
property for access for all the rear loading of the lots and trash pickup. So then when you cut this section out, the whole design without that.
Oh, I agree. I don't see how we move forward with the master plan without showing the entire master plan.
Right.
Either we are able to move forward with you guys seeing that we could get a conditional approval and only get the master plan approved, but to try to cut out lots or something to.
Well, and actually, I didn't think about the road
wouldn't
access.
do-
He's correct. I mean, the road access
Yeah.
is whacked on that side too,
Yeah,
if
I
you
wouldn't.
don't reroute it.
I wouldn't even recommend that we move forward with the master plan without showing the entire master.
And hopefully, time-wise, if you get on it and get with them, you might be able to get it done in what would be an acceptable amount of time to work with your client. It's possible.
And folks, certainly sympathize
Yeah.
with you because of the situation, because this is outside, as we've said ad nauseum, this is outside the city of Fairhope's regulatory authority. What I will say here is that it would be challenging to bring that type of condition approval to the Planning Commission as well as the City Council without some more data, without some additional data. So we certainly sympathize, but consider what's been said today, as you decide how you want to proceed with your client.
And
Y'all reached out to anybody at FEMA, or?
That's what we're trying to do now.
Okay.
And yeah,
Newberry as a whole has connections in that regard. It's just a matter of how long it's going to take. I mean, we'd like to think we could do it, and the process, and as you know, the problem we have is the problem on your end, is that the process, the time-wise it takes to even get
Right.
the master plan approved
Right.
is rather lengthy. So I guess there's a part of this we were thinking that we could move forward. Maybe even by the time city council is looking at this thing, we may actually have that detail worked out. So
Yeah.
to delay it just.
And just kind of stating what it is, with the layout as you have right now, it's in violation of the National Flood Insurance Program. So I don't know how we can do even a preliminary plat approval on something that currently, in its current state and with the current mapping, violates the NFIP. That's the issue we're in.
And the challenge there for the PUD approval, of course, is that certainly this is not the preliminary plat, this is not a subdivision application, but it is the site plan that supports the PUD. So we would be entering into the public record and approving, essentially approving a site plan accompanying a PUD that has regulatory compliance issues.
Yeah.
So out of an abundance of caution, it would be advisable that we don't go through that process.
Yeah, from our end, I'm hoping you get it pretty quick, because I'm hoping you get some feedback, because it's a really interesting project, and I'd love to be able to see it go forward.
Yeah, and of course, I appreciate Mike's efforts in reviewing
Yes.
it. I want to go on the record saying this, is that this is an example of from the cursory review that I've performed. As far as residential PUDs, this one really looks fantastic. Really looks fantastic, and I certainly wish you luck and hope you're able to make it go forward, and then you're able to get the answers you need from FEMA.
the only other comments you have in the letter about the green space and different things which can be addressed later. If you have any questions about those comments, I'd be more than happy to go over those with you as well, Steve. And if you want to do
I
that.
guess the comments about the gate, is that just a matter of asking for a waiver from the regs on that? Or do you, I mean, are there?
I mean, it's in the subdivision regulations, so you could request a waiver from that requirement of the subdivision regulations to have a gated community and to have the roads remain private. And then to have the roads remain private, you'd also have to request a waiver from the lots not fronting upon a publicly paved, maintained road on that, which would then come in the subdivision process is when the waivers would then be, have to be granted. On the green space, the green space calculations come from after you remove any type of topography or wetlands that can't be counted as a green space. And just looking at the numbers, it appeared that some of this area, the detention area, as long as the corner space in here and to the front of the property that's fronting on 6th Street was all being counted as green space. For the net density, is remove the right-of-way, remove the roads and all that, and then your green space is taken off of that number.
Right.
So when I did use my calculator, just did a couple quick checks on it, it appeared that there was being some area that was counted, so the green space was going to fall short using just this small circle in the middle, which may take a little bit of, new design or something, some tweaks or something alternate to it. And then also if the flood map gets changed, that could change where the buffer things could end up, and more allowable green space could be somewhere different
Yeah, we can work on that.
on that. So I said, for everything else, not thinking about the floodway issue in FEMA, everything else, was fairly minor, minor
Well,
thing.
we had a public meeting, went ahead and had our public meeting and, on site, and the neighborhood was all for the site. I don't know that we had maybe but one negative comment, and that had to do with just the through traffic, the concern
Connected
about,
to-
and the gate was a big plus to them.
Right.
That would cut down on that. So,
Yeah.
in general, everybody,
By the end of the,
yeah, everybody loved the project, just as we've all talked. So
Mm-hmm.
that, from the neighborhood standpoint, we were excited because this is one of the few projects I can go on into that I know I've got a neighborhood that
Yeah,
actually
that has
wants
your back.
something. So,
they want this.
so that's, just got to get over this big hurdle.
Yes, sir. So other than that, staff is in favor of the general idea and general concept, the location where it is, being M1 on that side of the street, should be residential. It's been zoned M1. Pulled up some of the old zoning maps back in at least 89, maybe back in the 60s. It was zoned M1, so it's served, maybe had a purpose, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, but it's now the way the property is developed around it. More residential use to a PUD for residential is definitely the direction that it should head. We think you guys are really onto something here. It's just like you said, that this one hurdle, getting over that first, and then seeing where we can go with it from there.
Questions?
See,
All right.
if you'll just keep me in the loop on the progress with the Loma, I'm gonna hold on to this file, and then we'll just go from there. Anything correspondence that you have with them, just kind of keep me in the loop and so we can keep on a time frame. So if it does get approved, we can make sure that everything that needs to be advertised can get in to try to meet specific deadlines to be able to not miss one of the planning commission meetings just by a few days because we weren't communicating with each other. So that way we can try to help you out as much,
You'll know as
much
soon
as
as
we
I know.
can. Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So we will move on to our next case. This is ZC 19.13. It will be a public hearing to request, by the request of Gayfer Village Partners to establish initial zoning of PUD, which is a planned unit development, conditional upon annexation into the city of Fairhope. And this is for a property located at the northwest corner of the intersection of Fairhope Avenue and State Highway 181. It'll the proposed name to be the Clump PUD, named after the Clump property. Mr. Scott Hutchinson with Goodwin Mills and Kaywood is with us here today on behalf of the developer. And Scott and Mr. Mitchell, welcome to the meeting. And Scott, we exchanged correspondence over the weekend, and many of the items we talked about in the email are routine edits, are normal edits of a routine nature. I think the two things I wanted to focus upon, and then we'll certainly answer your questions, was well, let me back up and give an overview since we don't have drawings on display for those watching and for those in attendance. This PUD is approximately 80 acres, if I remember correctly. And Mr. Hutchinson's nodding yes, approximately 80 acres. And again, northwest corner, Highway 181 and Fairhope Avenue / County Road 48. And the PUD proposes 3 units, and each unit with a slightly different type of use, with unit 1 primarily being commercial, and it is modeled after B2 zoning, within the PUD. Unit 2, primarily multifamily, modeled after R5 zoning. And then Unit 3, higher density, single-family residential, modeled after R3 zoning. And so, gentlemen, I guess my question here, my question was, is the intent to utilize the 10 units per acre of R5 zoning for Unit 2? I think was my first question I wanted to ask today.
That is correct.
Yes.
Which would put it at 220 units.
Very good. So you have approximately 22 acres in Unit 2, approximately, and so the allowable 10 units per acre gives us approximately 220 units. And so, gentlemen, let me ask you this. For example purposes in the site plan included with this PUD, is that pretty established, the number of buildings shown in Unit 2?
Well, the site plan, first of all, it's conceptual. And
Sure.
we wanted, that's when we separated it and called it sheet 1 of 1. We didn't necessarily want it established or recorded with the PUD. It was simply for, to make it easier understood. And so that could change, but that's what we have proposing, or it's what we're proposing right now. We just wanted to show how it could work.
Okay, okay. Very good. I guess my second question is, or really is just an advisement, just to advise the applicant and the engineer. Reviewing the site with Public Works Director Richard Johnson, assuming we proceed the normal course of action, that staff's desire would be to have at the subdivision stage a master drainage plan for the entire site. And so that would be something that we would probably include in the PUD as a requirement, that we have a master drainage plan for the entire site. That gives the city staff the reassurance and the comfort level that as the site is developed, you already have a master plan showing where the drainage will go, because you have several elements right there. So that is something that would likely be reflected as a condition of approval. We just wanted to reiterate that to y'all if you had any questions while we were here.
That certainly was our intent.
Okay,
to do it
very
that
good.
way. Yeah.
Very good, very good. And if y'all can pardon me for just a moment. Gentlemen, I think everything else in our correspondence is fairly routine. Obviously, at the PUD stage, we certainly understand that not every intricate detail may be on there. So there were a couple of things we pointed out in some bullet points about the draft site plan that you have that would be addressed at the subdivision stage. But while we were here and while you had full staff, we're certainly happy to answer any questions about that.
I appreciate your comments. Sorry you had to work on the weekend to get that.
Well, I'm having a bit of a capacity issue right now,
understand.
because I'm also very happy to be your interim director of planning and zoning, but that also requires that I still review my own cases as well. So I have found that to make that time requires making time.
I understand. But I did not see anything in here that we can't live with or easily address. The comments about the CVS and the convenience store, we'll wipe that off so it doesn't
Correct.
create unnecessary confusion or angst or anything like that. It was just, we probably shouldn't have. We probably should have scratched that off before we showed it. We just wanted to give an example. So we'll certainly take that off. The setbacks and the other comments, nothing that we can't live with, for sure. So I really don't have any questions. Tom, did you?
Do you want the multifamily taken off also, just listed as?
Well, you can answer that.
So gentlemen, I will leave that up to y'all. I think it might be advantageous at this point for the first appearance before the Planning Commission. It might be advantageous to reflect that the desire is that you're modeling it after R5, and that allows up to 10 units per acre. That this is definitely that Unit 2 definitely contains a multifamily proposes a multifamily development, and it might be wise to not reflect any locations of any buildings at this time, because the challenge is, of course, is when you adopt your PUD and you adopt your PUD site plan, then that site plan has to be built in substantial conformance. So it may be advantageous to modify your drawing to give you that flexibility for future purposes. And I think when you do your master drainage plan, that'll help you determine what this developer and future developers may place items.
Well, it was not our intent for this particular drawing, the conceptual site plan, and we didn't call it, so conceptual layout plan. It was not our intent for that to be recorded and used in any capacity other than just to show intent or show a conceptual way we could do it, not anything that we would have to follow. So we would still like to show it, and I say that because when we met with the mayor a couple times to go over this plan, the first time we did not have any apartments on there or any layout. It was just a blank space, and as engineers and planners and all that, we're used to visualizing things and seeing how it could fit on paper, but you need to be able to show something like this for a lot of other people to understand it. And the first time we met with the mayor, she wasn't very comfortable with it until we came back and we showed this is how we could do this, and it made more sense.
I think it
to her
helps
and
show
to
the green
staff.
spaces you're gonna have. I think it helps show
Yeah.
the impact of coverage, based on buildings and other footprints of parking and that kind of thing. I think that's a helpful
A giant
tool.
need not be built stamped on here
Correct.
would probably.
What I will do, gentlemen, is I'll give y'all some feedback from that question. What I'll do is I will double and triple check both ordinances and make certain that we reflect the wording in the staff report correctly to address that. But I'll give y'all some feedback to make certain that the way the PUD works as contemplated by the zoning ordinance, I'll make certain that we nail that correctly, so that way what is shown as need not be built for information only, I will nail it down for you in the ordinance and make certain we do that correctly. I'll follow up with y'all, probably tomorrow.
Okay, because we will have, probably in a week, we will have an actual colored rendering.
Okay.
Similar to this, just to help.
Sure, sure.
And so it'll be even more so than this. That being said, is on the CVS and the other building, are you suggesting totally taking that off, or just taking anything related to CVS or Chick-fil-A or anything like that?
It's
off?
not CVS.
Correct,
It's-
correct.
That was just a drawing
Sure.
that an engineer had and popped
Sure,
it on there.
sure.
just to
That's a
show
placeholder.
Could be one.
That's a
Are you
placeholder.
recommending just take all
I think it would
those?
probably be wise not to, even though at our, in this setting, in this meeting with the city staff and the engineer and the developer, we certainly understand that's a representative placeholder. But because these documents will have to be put into the public realm for advertising public notice purposes, it may be wise to be conservative in what you show on those drawings, so as not to cause confusion amongst the planning commission and citizens.
I would also like to say, I've still got people mad at me that Starbucks isn't coming here, because we were originally told that the old Hardee's was going to be a Starbucks and now it's something else. And I
Correct.
literally have people that are mad at me about that. So please don't
I'm
tell
not
them we're
mad at
getting a
you about
Chick-fil-A until they come for a
That's
building
correct.
permit.
Also, this is 22.4 or 22.7
Okay.
now, and which will make it 224 units.
Okay. And of course,
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
correct, that's
yeah,
correct.
sorry.
And as we've learned historically, we need to be very careful in the exact count, in the exact unit count. So discussing it informally in this setting, approximately 220 units. Now, understand, for those watching, that would be a multiple occupancy project approval process within the existing PUD to build that portion of the development. So that would be tremendously vetted, but yes, sir, it could very likely be 224 units at the, when we go through the MOP process. Correct, by the time you place everything in. So, gentlemen, I appreciate your time. Any other questions or feedback from staff? Okay, any other questions we can answer for the applicant?
I'm good.
All right,
Thank you,
gentlemen,
guys.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you,
good day.
gentlemen. And so we'll move on, and we'll move now to case number SD 19.09. And this is a public hearing to consider the request of Wise Properties for the plan approval of Pier Street Marketplace, a 4-unit multiple occupancy project. And we'll clarify, Mr. Larry Smith is the engineer of record representing the developer. And Larry, I'll begin. Now, in the description here in the agenda, we replicated the previous one, but correct me if I'm wrong, this is now a 3-unit MOP?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, very good. Very good. And just to for those watching, for those in attendance, this is an active case that we first reviewed at the staff level beginning in January, and we had some technical review issues that required the case to not be heard yet by the Planning Commission. And now several revisions have been made, so we're back here today to review it again and get it prepared for Planning Commission. And so, Larry, as you heard with my discussion with Mr. Hutchinson, I had to give you your feedback over the weekend, and I think, Larry, a majority of all the comments are all of a very routine nature. So what I wanted to do here is just, given that, be able to answer any questions.
No, I mean, the only comments we had were pretty much expected, which was
Sure.
parking
Exactly.
along Mobile Street, which we'd like to have the opportunity to discuss that with the Planning Commission and get their feedback. Just with the parking that exists along there, as we've talked about
Sure,
several
exactly,
times.
exactly.
And so, if acceptable, we'd like to move forward with that parking shown as is, and if the Planning Commission deems it not acceptable, we'll put it in the gravel in the rear. There's
Gotcha.
space there for it, but we believe it would fit in with the character of that area. So, other than that, everything was pretty much, I think, answered in the resubmittal. I think we have some water and sewer comments possibly coming from
Yes.
Jay. I did meet with Mike Allison out at the site, and the light pole can stay in its current location, and the other lines that are there are not actually his. They're MediaCom and AT&T. So we're working with AT&T and MediaCom to see if we can possibly get those relocated, just to give the balconies a line of sight without power sitting right, or not power, lines sitting right in front of their porches. Our initial concern was having lines that had power on them, but still we want to see if we can get a semi-unobstructed view. Power actually cuts across and goes across the street and then comes back.
Correct.
And Mike was actually kind of excited because they've been trying to clean up that whole corner anyway, and
Yes.
said if we can get MediaCom and AT&T on board, get them to coordinate with him, because he has a few other things he wants to do on Pier Street. So.
Very good. And so, Larry, so what we'll do is we'll proceed with placing it on the agenda, and we'll utilize the most recent drawings that you sent us as a part of this. We'll put it on the agenda with those, and then, like we said, the parking issues and that sort of thing. We've talked about it ad nauseum, so
Yeah.
we'll use that. We'll reflect staff recommendations, and we'll just discuss it with the Planning Commission and get whatever approval they desire.
Okay.
They desire.
And did we have any additional landscape comments? I couldn't tell from reading through here. It said, see landscape comments for, or is he working through next weekend to get those?
Larry, Larry, what I'll do is I'll verbalize that for you. And again,
Just because landscaping was the big issue
exactly.
on the site.
So just to touch on it briefly, the landscape ordinance, compliance with landscape ordinance, the applicant wished to make application to and request some relief from municipal court, and that process was carried through, and the municipal court agreed with and granted that. The only comment I'd add to that, Larry, is that since we are retaining the perimeter, since we're retaining still retaining the fence along the east side of the property, that we do maintain some kind of greenery in front of that fence. And I think we talked about it verbally, but that's the primary landscape comment I had.
And he's got vines detailed growing along that fence.
Very good, very good.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Appreciate that very much.
All right. Try to get some sleep tonight now.
I
That
will
was a
try.
late email last night. About woke me up.
So, Larry, your prayers are appreciated because we have city council meeting tonight. We have city council meeting tonight.
You don't answer emails that late.
Very good, very good. So,
I go to bed early.
there we go.
Wake up early.
And Ms. Milford has not joined us just yet, and we were going to fall back to case number ZC 19.11, as well as cover SD 19.29 and SD 19.30. Now, and so for Mr. Stephen Pumphrey of Dewberry, SD 19.30 is a routine final plat approval for Phase 6, which is Golden Oak at Firethorn, and that's 26 lot section of that. Steve, I do not have any kind of information with me, but if there's a question you want to ask of staff, we can relay to Nancy. We are certainly welcome to do that. You are certainly happy to do that.
I don't think I have a floodway on that one, so I'm all right.
Okay, very, very good. Okay, well, we will fall back then to SD 19.29, and well, I'll tell you what. Let's do this. Let's fall back to SD 19.29, and this is the request of Two Hands Design and Development for a preliminary plat approval of Hilltop subdivision, a 29-lot subdivision, and this is located on the west side of Section Street between Twin Beach Road and Battles Road. And for those watching, this is very near the recently approved Phase 6 of Battles Trace of the Colony at the Grand. And gentlemen, like I said, I apologize. Miss Milford had an appointment that she could not reschedule. And gentlemen, I did not review, not even a cursory review of this development. But if you want to verbalize for us any questions that you have, we'll certainly relay them to Nancy for follow-up.
Good morning. So we got Nancy's comments late Friday evening, and I looked over them then, and then actually I've spoken to her this morning over the phone.
Okay.
She had told me she wasn't going to be able to make it here, but I can talk through a couple of the items that she had.
Go ahead, because I did have one question.
Okay.
once we-
What's your
And
question?
gentlemen, first of all, June, it's the way the planning commission meetings are scheduled and the way they fall. We were very fortunate in May that we had a month that had 5 Mondays and Tuesdays. We pay the price for that in June, where we have less time to review these cases. So, gentlemen, I apologize for that and for the quick turnaround. But gentlemen, go ahead, and so we'll be able to relay these questions to Nancy.
No, I was just interested in looking, because if you go on the Baldwin County site, well, you've got a creek bed that runs through it, but it doesn't show as a blue line on the Baldwin County site, but it showed up on web soils as a blue line creek. There's no FEMA, there's no flood zone, there's no formal flood zone on the area. What kind of water are you seeing that's flows through there, just out of curiosity? Because it is showing up as a creek bed. I couldn't find a name for that creek bed either, but I know you've done a study on it. I'm just curious, what are you seeing?
I guess to tie it in with a comment I had, because we had set this up off of 30-foot buffers.
Okay.
The subdivision regulations state a list of buffers in there, and it calls out in the table watershed.
Mm-hmm.
And so, using by the definition of your watershed, well, then that would be any drainage basin out there, and that certainly does not seem to be correct.
Right.
The subdivision regulations do state water courses, and that's a very broad statement. It
Right.
covers every type of stream that FEMA or the Corps would regulate, plus any other thing that y'all want to bundle in there, which I can respect that. It seems to me there's a typo in there that maybe that you're asking for water courses definition for that 50-foot buffer and not watershed. But the regulations that they state don't say that. And so that's why we set up the 30-foot buffer.
We'll look at I was going to say, I would imagine you are correct, because a watershed is a big O area, not necessarily specific to any stream bed. A buffer is specific to an area of water. So I would,
So if your regulations were amended, or this table was amended to reflect water courses, well, then it gives you very defined definition of what that would be.
Right.
And it would certainly cover this
Okay.
feature here.
Okay.
So what we have done is we sent a group out to do a study on it, to review it, and they made a determination that they think it's a ephemeral stream,
Okay.
but we never, since we're not going to do any work in it, we didn't send it into the
You
Corps
just
to get
buffered it
justified. We
and-
just buffered it.
Okay.
Based on what I thought 30 foot is, and that's what we went with, and
Sure.
so that's kind of where it's at.
Okay. It was just odd that it showed up in one place and not another, because typically if you've got a named creek or an actual, what I refer to as a blue line stream that shows
Right.
up on them, it generally shows up either on none of them or on both of them. And it was odd, because I checked the web soils on this one looking for hydric soils, and it showed the blue line going through unnamed, and then you go back to the Baldwin County side and it didn't show it at all. So I didn't know how it would actually be
Our
classified.
environmentalists didn't pick up any wetland material
Okay.
in there, so it doesn't show up as wetlands.
Okay.
So to go back through her comments here, since you don't have a copy of them, I'll just talk through them. She's referencing, clarifying who the owners are, clarifying that we had our E&O in there. Wants us to add the property owners across the street to the plat. We'll do that. She's got a comment in here that refers to the green space and an email that was sent to us on March the 5th, 2019 for some new subdivision regulations. I couldn't find that email, but what I did go to the website to download, I guess that would be the most recent subdivision regulations. And we've had this conversation before, I've had it for 10 years. I wish that the city would make some sort of amendment when they change the subdivision regulations, when you add a new code to it, put an amendment there, because that
Yeah.
May 2007 date, or whenever these were adopted back then, is the same cover sheet that you've used for the last 15 years, so, or the last 12 years, or whatever it's been. So it makes it confusing for us to try to figure out which sheet are we playing off of, because these things swap all the time. So that would make it much easier for us. But
And just to interject there, Trey, I appreciate that comment, and there's and we won't go on ad nauseum about it here. There's a procedural aspect to this, but I think what we need to do, and I'll talk to Emily Boyette about this, is that probably the easiest thing to do is, since you click on the link and it downloads the document right there on screen, it's probably just to simply put a watermark in the Adobe document, a very faint watermark that latest revision is a certain date. So that's something we'll talk
well,
about
a lot of
doing.
people, they have the regulations were adopted by this date, but then they'll go in there and
Exactly.
they'll list every time it's amended.
Correct.
And so you got an agenda of every time it's amended.
Well, and there should be a chart at the very end, buried in the document. But you're correct.
It would just be helpful so that
Sure.
we know when we're
No,
submitting.
that's a great suggestion.
When a project gets submitted,
Absolutely.
we know which one we're actually falling
Yeah.
under. And so
No, that's a fantastic.
it was listed here as a date, and so I just wanted to bring it up
Sure.
as an item that I want to talk about. But the item is that the green space, this project has 1.45 units an acre. It's 10% green space. We're showing 4.69 acres of common area. The detention areas are implemented in with the landscaping and stuff like that. There's no slopes that are great. This said the regulations say 3-to-1. Our slopes are less than 4-to-1, so we comply with all that. So we're showing 24% open space in the
Outstanding.
development. So that's that item there. She's requesting an operations and maintenance plan that was submitted with our package. The maintenance agreement was submitted with our original packet, so if that needs to be resubmitted, I'll be glad to provide another copy of that. But
Okay.
those were within the initial packet that we submitted to the city. Adding a note to the plat about the POAs maintaining the ponds, that's not a problem. We discussed the buffer, and so we've got it shown as 30, and we've talked about that, why I did that. Now, we are incorporated in excess of 50 feet everywhere within but 2 locations on this, along this buffer area. One spot I've got my 4-to-1 slopes coming in at 45 feet off the water, off the buffer. And then I've got a level spreader that's encroaching to within 30 feet of the buffer. So I got it based off that, and that's just my level spreader. Outside of that, I meet the 50. So this morning I talked to Nancy, and I didn't know if it may be just as easy as just to say that I'll just request a waiver for that.
Okay, and Trey, what I ask you to do is that, and that's certainly fine. That's certainly fine if that's what you like to do. When you do, just be aware that if the advertising deadline, because we have to advertise the waiver, just be aware we are up against a deadline for advertisement. And so if it is not able to be advertised in time, it wouldn't be able to appear, that waiver wouldn't be able to appear on the agenda. And so, and unfortunately, like we talked about earlier, that's beyond the control of staff because we are still required by state law to put it in a newspaper. So we're at the mercy of newspaper deadlines for advertisement.
Well, my request for the waiver was just a way to clean it up so that.
Oh, sure,
but I
sure.
think we got a issue between whether it's 30 or 50 because
Sure.
your book doesn't clarify that. And
Sure.
so how do you want me to proceed?
No. So if the if you see the need for the waiver because of a technical issue that both staff and the planning commission can evaluate, submit that to Nancy as quickly as possible.
When is your deadline?
As we sit here, I don't know the advertising deadline.
I mean, if I can send it to her today.
Yes, sir. So what I'd urge you to do is get that to her as quickly as possible.
Okay.
As quickly as possible, so that way, if it is possible for the advertisement to occur, then the waiver can be considered.
Okay. 'Cause I don't know that we need it or not. I was just trying to.
I understand.
Be amenable,
No.
so.
I understand completely.
And then we're going to add the finished floor elevations to the plat. That was one of Eric's comments. She had a comment here about traffic, and it said that that Richard Johnson had reviewed it, but then we wanted verification whether a study is required or not. It's 29 lots. It would fall under the threshold, and I didn't know if we needed to do something additional for that or not. It was very vague
Trey-
on what I should do.
And Trey, unfortunately, even though I've been with Fairhope, a little over 2 years, I haven't reviewed a case that you submitted. But typically, what we simply request is for the engineer just to write a letter,
Okay.
and put a statement that the trip generation of the proposed development does not warrant a traffic study, and just sign and date the letter with your PE stamp.
Okay,
And that's sufficient. That is more than sufficient for that.
no problem. And then she had a comment about some street lights, wanting to move 3 of those by a stop sign. We actually, the 3 intersections are on a dead-end street. We've got the street light across the street so that you would pull up and you would be looking at the street light at the dead-end intersection.
Okay.
And I think that's probably the better place. And one of them actually is by the mailbox, the centralized mailbox, instead of lights, that centralized mailbox. So
Sure.
I was going to talk about just leaving them right we got them. It's not a big deal to move them, but that's why we put them where we put them. And then she's got a comment here about the marked up plans, and I haven't seen those. And there was a checklist that's supposed to come with us, and I haven't seen that either. And that we need to have all this back to you by Friday. And
Okay.
I need to get the rest of the information and be able to respond to it.
Sure.
Well, I am going back and forth with Mr. Ramus, is that the?
Rambo? Lee?
Rambo.
Lee? Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I'm talking about the lift station. and
Right.
Is there any resolution to that?
Well, what we got is, we looked at it about the potential, because you had brought up the potential about trying to connect to the sewer system to the south of us.
No, a little bit more than potential. I was hoping to get it done.
And so we looked at alignment from them, it was HMR at the time, now it's Go Mills and Kaywood, to send us a location for that. And so we reviewed that potential, and then we also had a letter from, I believe it was from you actually, stating that we needed to put in a pump station up in the front. And so it looked like, we had 2 options to go with. The one to hook to the property to the south has several hurdles in there that we would have to overcome to make that connection. One of them is that they were going to have to revise a section of the line and then stub over there to us, and they want reimbursement for that. There is the way the subdivision lays out, there was not a good way to get that to that connection point that they could provide. We've got lots to the northeast of this, and we would have to actually almost have to fall back down the stream buffer that I've already talked about protecting with a long gravity line to run right through the middle of that to get to this connection point right here. That's the second one. The third one is that there is a title problem or a title issue on a strip of land that's between us and the RSA's project. There's a 50-foot strip of land in there that there's a title issue in there, and who actually owns that and controls that piece in there. And so we don't have permission to actually just go there and jump on that to go through it. And so with those items in place and not knowing the schedule of how this project was going to go together, and then we had the letter that said that we could just set the pump station up front. That's the direction we went. That's the direction that we went with. So
Before we had the meeting with the other group, huh? You know?
I don't know. No, sir.
I know, we talked about it.
Yeah, we did, and so we certainly looked at it. And so that's why we went with what we went.
So Trey, forgive me for not picking up on that. This development will install its own lift station?
That's what we're proposing.
Okay.
Right.
And then you
yeah.
connect to the existing force main on Section Street, it'll
Right.
discharge into that?
Right. And that's the way we submitted the pump calculations in the station.
Okay. Okay.
Characteristics for that.
Correct.
Because I don't have a clear route over to that section that RSA was, potentially could stub to us. And
Correct. Correct. Because
I gave you all the information I knew about at the time, didn't it?
there you go. Because Colony at the Grand / Battle Straits, they're constructing a lift station right now that accept the wastewater from Phase 6 of Colony at the Grand, and it actually would run to the east. It would discharge into a force main that would run to the east, work its way around the new large retention basin that they've constructed, then connect to the force main on Section Street. So sounds like unfortunately that wasn't doable in this case.
Yeah, no, we certainly looked at it. I would much rather make that connection if I could.
Well, Beaufort and I have been talking about connectivity in terms of, not only just access by vehicular traffic, but pedestrian connectivity and drainage connectivity and
Right.
utility connectivity. And
No,
of course, our
I think
goal-
it would be smart. I just,
Yeah.
there was this one, there was a lot of hurdles in my place that I just couldn't.
Sure. And I appreciate Richard for bringing that up. And a good example of that was on Twin Beach Estates, is that between two of the lots in the northeast corner of the development, we asked the engineer and the developer to set aside an additional standalone drainage and utility easement, so that way it was between two lots, and I forget the width, but it was substantial width for future purposes, that it reaches out and connects to another area of future development. So that way it's better to have it and not need it than need it to not have it. And so
Right.
we had an example of that. That's something that in future developments that we'll look at the staff level, possibly maybe even come up with some type of an amendment to the subdivision regulations to assist with that as well.
Okay.
And that might have helped you here in this case, but
The 50-foot no man's land, is it either going to be yours or RSA's, or is it going to be somebody that you don't know yet?
We don't know. I mean, I'm totally guessing here, but I would think at some point in history that when there was somebody did not convey a 50-foot piece for some reason, and that ownership is probably hanging back there somewhere on the calendar, and I don't know.
and so Trey, I'm sorry,
People
go ahead.
didn't do plats, and so you had 22 acres.
Is that
And I only
a
sold you
survey?
19 of it.
Right.
And I kept the other strip here, and then, so that the progress over time has always only been dealing with the 20. The county plat, tax maps hasn't picked up this remnant here. And so there's got to be some title work to go back and actually figure out when that was conveyed and when this other piece was conveyed off of it, and where the title sits on that. And I just don't know, that.
Where that listing accepted is conveyed over 20 acres, listing accepted.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's not showing in our stuff, and our surveyor, couldn't get it. HMR's guys were like, well, whose piece is that? Is that y'all's? I'm like, well, it's not ours. Well, our title's not showing it, so it's just got to be vetted out, so.
Interesting. Well, and Trey, just my final comment I had for you was that we do have a pretty detailed checklist that we go through now, and we've basically taken the entire subdivision regulations and to a lesser extent the zoning ordinance and put them into a line-by-line format where we can check certain things. But what I've instructed fellow staff to do is that, because that can be a bit lengthy at times and a bit redundant, the main thing is to make certain that you give a review letter to the engineer or surveyor handling the case, and just basically give the bullet points and be able to explain from what and give them chapter and verse out of the subdivision regs or whatever appropriate reg, explaining where that comes from. So and a lot of the engineers that I deal with, that I've been dealing with since I've been at Fairhope, I'll give them a copy of the entire document, because some engineers like it because they can use it as a searchable document and be able to see the full text of what the ordinance or the subdivision reg requires. But the main thing is that you have a review letter with the bullet points citing the issue and from where it's derived.
Okay, so this is really all I need to respond to then?
Yes. You've got the review comments right there. You've got the review comments by there. That's what Nancy will need the reply.
Okay, so, and then Jason, you wanted to mention about the buffer and what you want to do in there, since we've got staff here in this work session, to make sure there was no issue with that?
There was just a lot of confusion on my part. I apologize on understanding some of the nomenclature around the drainage way that runs through the front of the property. Sort of dumbing it down for me, there are several beautiful live oak trees that are in there that are in the process of decline because of the camphor trees that have grown up around there. So my concern was simply that while we did not have plans to improve that drainage way at all, I just wanted to make sure I didn't get hung up with my ability to go in and clean some of the trash trees out and open up sun for the stuff we were trying to save.
Well, and that's a great question. The subdivision regulations, this is where it can be a bit confusing about the authority, because you have both requirements of the subdivision regulations. You have requirements of the landscape ordinance where applicable. Then you have requirements of the zoning ordinance as well. So at the subdivision level, certainly tree preservation, preservation to the maximum extent practicable is certainly desired. I think the simplest and easiest advisement I can give you is that if there's a tree that's questionable about whether it will survive and whether or not it's healthy, we can get Paul Merchant to look at it with you and give you some advisement, and you're welcome to contact him directly.
Well, I think what we're talking about is more like invasive trees. We want to get the invasive.
Oh, if you're talking about now, that's correct.
Yeah, we want to protect the quality trees. We want to get rid of the trash invasive species.
Oh, as far as
so,
if you're talking about camphor trees, popcorn trees, Chinese tallow trees,
Yeah.
Chinese privet hedge, all of that, wipe that stuff out.
Okay. He was concerned that we put the buffer in here, and we agreed with the buffer. The buffer gets recorded, and then he goes in and removes these invasive species. He didn't want to have a problem.
No.
So that's what we want to
No,
get
no,
out.
no.
These are actually down in like the stream bed area too and all that. See, it can only help drainage, so I mean, I don't know of anything.
No, you remove those invasives, it allows the native plant, you remove those invasives, it allows more space for natives to grow. So camphor trees, popcorn trees, if you want to wipe out some Kogan grass while you're at it, do that too.
I got a seeds pick out if you get bored. I got one at the house.
And
Just on the
if there's any
connectivity,
questions
are
on-
y'all showing connectivity to the other property to your south in your layout, or are we talking about just two completely exclusive subdivisions that connectivity's thrown out the window?
And we don't have any connect. You talking about the
It's
RSA
my
space?
understanding that that subdivision to the south is gated,
It's private.
fenced, do not want anybody connecting. We would love a pedestrian walkway and so that neighbors could,
To the south, you've got
to the
Battles
south,
Trace?
get to know each
Correct.
other.
Okay,
So
so
that is
that's
a
all private.
TR district.
Yeah.
And so that is a very unique zoning district. And a lot of people think it's a PUD. It's actually a zoning district. So it has its own unique set of standalone requirements and allowances that allow it to be gated. So it's one of the few that via the way the ordinance is allows it to be gated.
Which means there is no connectivity, is that?
Yeah,
right?
no, there's,
Well,
well, it's,
basically, there's no
But we
There's no
are
con-
adding sidewalks along our section of the road that would connect to
Right.
theirs, and so that would be some.
So you do have
connectivity there.
pedestrian connectivity in the right-of-way added by this development. So,
Right.
so that's encouraging. That's encouraging and beneficial to the public. Fellow staff, any more questions for Mr. Ginwright?
Make sure we can't work it to where we get one lift station out there. I mean, we got 80, and all we need to do is add as many as we can to keep more operation and maintenance requirements on us. I'd rather eliminate some when I can. I mean, you understand that.
Yes, sir.
And I just, if there's any possible way to do that, I don't want to have to get too bogged down in the
Yeah, I just
details
don't
of it
know
all.
how to get across there. I mean, I don't have the right right now.
Yeah, and I just thought at one time that there was provisions on both sides to be able to accomplish that.
Not at this point, I don't have the
Yeah.
right to get through there.
Yeah, it sounds like, Trey, it sounds like you vetted the heck out of it as
I've
much
tried
as you can
to.
right now.
I've tried to, I mean,
We
I'm not-
approached it as though that were
Right.
the way we wanted to go.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
then after hitting our head a few times, we realized we would just have to
I
take
mean,
that
and I
path.
believe me, I mean, I have selfish reasons for wanting to do that, but I can't help but believe it's cheaper on both of y'all too,
Yeah.
to share something, but am I missing something in that?
Well, there's a
It
50-foot
was-
strip of property that I can't get through. I don't have the right to go across.
Well, yeah, and I heard that.
Okay,
I'm
I
not
just-
arguing that point at
Right,
all, but I
okay.
mean, if, who's gonna get the 50 foot? Is it gonna be somebody that's gonna stay between y'all, or is it gonna be?
We don't
That's a-
know
that's
yet.
an
It's
answer I don't
gotta
have.
be
Well, I would think
researched.
you'd wanna make sure you know that before you go too far into what plans you're making, I would think. Or are you just gonna leave 50
No,
foot?
we're going with the property that he's bought, and that's what he's got, so that.
So you didn't, you're not anticipating getting any part of that 50 foot?
I'm not planning on it. I see no reason to plan on that at this point.
And it's not it's not a discrepancy in your survey of your property?
No,
No.
sir.
Okay. I'll try to find out more about it.
All right. Gentlemen, Mr. General, Mr. Tickle, thank you.
Thank y'all.
Y'all have a great
Uh-huh.
day.
Appreciate it.
All right, so Mr. Godwin, you want to come to the table? And we'll fall back and discuss ZC 19.11. This is a public hearing to consider the request of Kerrigan Properties to rezone multiple properties from R6 Mobile Home Park District and R2 Medium Density Single Family District and RA Residential Agriculture District to a planned unit development, a PUD. And this property is located on the west side of State Highway 181, just north of Bay Meadows Avenue. And Mr. Ursula Godwin, on behalf of Sawgrass, who's the engineering firm handling this case for the developer. And Ursula, good morning to you. And I have a brief cursory awareness of the project, and I know we discussed it informally a few months ago. But I'm not privy to the specific review comments you have, and again, apologize that Ms. Milford couldn't be with us this morning, but we're happy to hear your questions.
Okay.
And at a minimum, we'll have record of it that we can relay to Nancy.
Okay, sounds good, I appreciate it. So, to date, we don't have any formal comments from
Okay.
Nancy on it. We've got several emails back and forth on some questions and so forth. Couple things, though, that I will ask that she's put in emails. One, she made an initial comment about, the development not meeting the goals of the comprehensive plan. And we've run into this once before. I think it was with Twin Beach, I think, in writing that PUD. But, in review of the comp plan, there are no specific goals that are outlined in that. So there's some objectives I think it goes into, but it goes in there and talks about that goals are a broader, basically it doesn't establish goals. So I asked Nancy if she would to please provide me what items she wants us to make sure that we address in terms of that. It's a PUD requirement that has to, quote, meet the goals, but then the comp plan doesn't have the goals outlined. So it's just get a little clarification on that so we make sure we're addressing
Sure.
the necessary items. One of the other items that she's mentioned was, she said that she recommended that we go find the new green space requirement that was just approved. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So in brief, you have additional requirements, but also additional opportunities for green space. And so currently in the subdivision regulations, we actually now have a chart. And so depending upon the density, oversimplified, the higher the density, the higher the green space requirement.
Okay.
Now, but built in with that, there is the opportunity to get to count items toward the green space percentage that wouldn't be counted previously.
Okay.
So for example, if someone had a retention detention area and they have 3-to-1 or lesser slopes, around that, we'll just use retention as an example, where you have a wet pond, and that can actually be utilized as a true amenity by the public, then there's a certain percentage of that actual water surface
Okay.
that can be counted toward the green space.
Okay.
So those are some additional opportunities to get green space credit.
Okay.
Without it being green, it can actually be water.
Right. Where are those? I've not, so, because I've looked at zoning and,
It's like page 33, somewhere around
In the
page
subdivision
33
regulations.
in the
Subdivision reg-
subdivision
Yes.
regulations.
the ones online.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Now, Ursula, let me
And-
give you a caveat. We have experienced some odd website problems
Uh-huh.
where the website will refresh and documents uploaded
Right.
will revert back to a previous version.
Okay.
That has been addressed multiple times and tested multiple times.
Yep.
If you need an updated copy, we are happy to send you one via email.
Okay.
Where there's no doubt it's the correct version, because and you heard our discussion with Mr. Jenright, that the copy I keep on the desktop of my computer actually has the latest revision of update as a watermark on it.
Gotcha.
And I can give you that exact copy, so there's no doubt it's
You can send me
correct.
an email, and I can get you a copy of
Okay.
the
Yeah,
exact.
because I was looking through some of this. Matter of
And
fact,
the reason I know
just
is
now.
I type in 33 on top of my little Adobe search, type in 33, and it gets me pretty close to where those green space standards start
Right,
off,
right,
where the
right.
chart's listed. And with those amendments, we also, from the zoning ordinance, put in some graphics that help illustrate and give guidance on different types of green space that can be
Okay.
utilized.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've got the old version is what I'm looking at here, but we'll get that from you and make sure we got. Because currently, what we have is 20% or 21% or so is green space.
Okay.
Even before we address any of the potential, reductions we can, or advantages we could take from the other. So that I was, I had just a question about for her. The other is, you notice on y'all may see it but the email where it sort of lined out the issues she's got here, that it says the applicant is requesting very high density of 6.6 units per acre. Do you know how she came up with that by chance?
Well, generally, we take the number of units divided by the number of units divided by the acreage of the site. Now, again, I
Okay.
do not have that drawing in front of me. What do your drawings say,
Okay,
Ursula?
so what we submitted was 149 units on
Okay.
about 36 acres, so that was about 4.1 units per acre.
Okay.
So the 6.6 obviously looks, way out of line in
Okay.
terms of a request on our part, as well as something,
Okay.
for you guys to get behind. But, we've got, that's 4.1. Now, we've gone in addition to, we've taken some steps a little bit further and actually set out, because, obviously to date, there's not been any hard design, no, hard surveying done, any of that kind of stuff, but we have set down, and looked at this site and gone in and basically laid out some drainage areas, actual pond sizes, things like that. And so we've gotten that density reduced now to a maximum of how many we can actually get on the property now that we've got all the, an infrastructure laid out and so forth. So, and we're down to like 133 lots. So it's now
Okay.
down into 3 point some odd units per acre but on the 6.6, I just wanted to make sure I understood
Okay.
what I was up against in terms of, sort of that density, because I never could get a number to work on 6.6 an acre. So I was just making sure there
Okay.
wasn't something there.
So perhaps was there a typo somewhere in the actual acreage, or?
There may be something in what we
Okay.
submitted. I'm not going to
Okay.
say we didn't make a mistake, but
Sure.
for the clarity's sake, we're not asking for 6.6.
Okay, all right,
units
well,
per
hey,
acre.
and Ursula, I appreciate that. I mean, that's why we're having this meeting.
Right.
That's
So,
why we're having this meeting, so that's a great question right there.
And on the green space, we're talking about the density and some of it being higher. The green space is calculated from the the net density
Gotcha.
of it. That removes right-of-ways, retention or detention areas, any area that topographically can't be developed is where the green space net density is taken from. So that's
Okay.
where that percentage, or that number, correlates with the required percentage that's in the chart when you're looking at the subdivision regulations. So it uses a little bit different density than just units divided by acres
Okay.
for the green space standards only.
Gotcha.
Just want
Okay.
to make sure that was clear.
Okay, we'll look at that too, just to make sure. As far as the only other items that you and I think me and you and Richard talked about, Richard made some comments about some connectivity and things. We've addressed some of that. So this is the newest layout. And I was waiting on the client to give us the heads up to send it out before we shot it over, but they just gave me that this morning, so I printed out a quick and dirty one. But you can see we sort of eliminated that. Richard had a lot of concern about the dead-end streets
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So
And
we've
the nickname we give them are hammerheads.
Right, that's right.
So-
So we made some loops, and then where they do dead end, we're basically providing connectivity to some larger
Future
piece of
development.
future properties around that, if should they ever want to do that. So we took that down,
Yeah, go ahead.
you know, a lot, or took out all of those. So, and then there was some concern, I think, either from y'all or Nancy, about gated private streets.
Correct.
We've gotten rid of that. We're not
Okay.
doing gated private.
Okay.
We're not, she made a comment to me the other day about, that with the building footprint and then an accessory structure, that it would be 75% coverage of the lot. But looking back through the regs, I think where she's getting that is when it talks about accessory structures in the zoning regs for residential districts, it says that they can't exceed 25% of the rear lot, not 25% of the lot.
Right, 25% of the rear yard.
Rear yard.
25% of the rear
Right,
yard.
so I think she's taken that 25% and 55% and adding them together, when really it's 25% of a much smaller percentage area.
Right.
So just, just
Yeah,
clarification.
each
on
one
that.
of those is a standalone calculation.
Right.
Yeah, each one
So-
of those is a standalone calculation.
But, so we're trying to get something. She made a comment about us coming back, maybe sitting down with you guys to look at it, but I wanted to get y'all that, let you sort of start processing that a little bit.
Okay.
And, see how that fits in the general plan, because like I said, I know in that instance where you've addressed the amount of areas we need for detention, we've addressed green space outside of any detention areas. We're not calculating any of that. So, we've tried to keep it central and, along the perimeter and whatever central areas as it reads in the regs or something. So, but anyway, that y'all can start looking at that. I can email it to you, and then, we can go from there.
Ursula, did you have, and I think Nancy was going to ask this question, I'll ask it for her.
Okay.
Did you talk with with your client about possibly the first swipe at this, letting it be an informal review with the Planning Commission?
I've spoken to them, and they're still sort of trying to figure out timing, if they have that amount of timing available.
Well, and certainly in this meeting, we are not speaking for the Planning Commission.
Sure.
We're certainly not speaking for the Planning Commission, but reflecting, it would be remiss if we didn't, reflect some of the questions they ask and some of the feedback they've given previously. Something of this magnitude might very well be tabled the first time it's heard. Certainly that is their prerogative and
Sure.
their desire if they wish to do that. Knowing that and keeping that in mind, it might be advantageous to do like we said, is for the first appearance of it be an informal review for actual consideration at the next meeting or at a future meeting what's desirable. So
Okay.
certainly that is in the toolkit available to the developer if they wanted
Yep.
to go that route. I really think that might be advantageous in this case.
Sure.
So something to consider.
Yeah, no, and I told Nancy I'm not against doing that. I've sent that up the chain and waiting on some response from those
I
guys.
understood completely.
I
But
think there's been a lot of comments about a PUD being something unique, something special. you
Right.
know, And I don't know if that's what that represents or not, but.
Right, well,
I think
and
you need to be very cautious
Yeah.
about how you represent a compact development versus a PUD with unique features.
Well, and I'll be honest, I mean, in the efforts of these guys, the developer there, it's gotten to a point, I think, for a developer where they have a smaller footprint like those lots, and there is nothing in the zoning regs to accommodate a development like that
Yeah.
beyond a PUD. So, it sort of, hog ties us in the sense of,
Is that the entire boundary of the property that's fully developed? That is everything?
That's everything.
Okay.
yeah. And so, one thing that seems a little more appealing, I think, in terms of the uniqueness or what, when it comes to that particular piece of property is that, unlike an area that would be unzoned in the county or, an R2 or, whatever zone piece of property, this is zoned R6. So
Correct.
it's for trailer park is what it's zoned for.
Right.
And so, while Nancy tells me that that's not really a per se argument that we can use, it is a reality that these, a use by right scenario would be for those guys that develop a trailer park, should they want to,
Yeah.
Instead, they've got a potential buyer that wants to do something that, really is less dense. We've done a
It
layout.
acts almost like there's a combination of R6, R2, and R.
Yeah, the only thing, the big piece is R6. There's two small lots out here on the front of 181 that are the RA and R2.
Oh, okay.
So the
The bulk
monster
of it is R6.
bulk of the development is R6.
Okay.
So that's one of the things that, I think both the developer, staff, and I think the planning commission too has to look at is the exchange in what are we getting versus what we could get kind of situation. And I'm not saying that that's something to dangle over their head, but I think that does provide some of the uniqueness of what you're offering there is, I'm not sure that Fairhope's running in the direction of wanting to do trailer parks. And, and especially when density comes down to a question, I mean, that's an allowable 6 units per acre density, so we're trying to sort of, give and take a little bit on both of those instances. And then obviously, and I know this because I've heard the planning commission say it, I know that the cost of development is of no concern of them, but it's obviously a reality in the sense of, how much does it take to build all these streets and buy land and all that kind of stuff and then turn out development, and make it marketable.
Right.
So, obviously that's all things that I have no effect over, y'all don't,
Oh, sure.
they don't, but it's definitely a reality.
Market driven.
Right.
Exactly.
And that goes back to, single narrow lots versus maybe a townhouse or, some fourplex or something where you have
Right.
more open space between the buildings. And I don't know if that's.
And, what these guys are, what they're wanting to do is apparently they have a market for a resident that is now down to the, they don't want the yard, they don't want the maintenance, they don't want the,
Right.
smaller house, smaller footprint of what they actually own, and then much larger, amenities, a lot more green space, a lot more common areas, a lot more of the community side of stuff, and less personal responsibility.
And so the PUD defines the coverage then.
That's right, and so that's what we're
And so
trying to
you
do.
would reduce the coverage to maybe make the comment that we're, allowing more impervious surfaces or more pervious surfaces to remain because
Right.
we're allowing a smaller.
Well, and that's one of the things that we've got, and I hate to sort of do a comparison, but again, I think it's a good tool to understand the difference between what's required in R6 versus what a PUD would do. And in that R6 area, we actually, in laying it out in just that piece of property on just the R6 zone property, there was 150 units is what we were able to get. And those are 150 units that are, have to have a 20-foot wide driveway. They have to have a, road frontage, so a 2-lane street in the front, and then a rear alley entry in the back. So, we got twice the impervious area doing a mobile home park as you would doing a PUD. And those are all things that I think, again, provide sort of the uniqueness. Maybe not, is it unique to every PUD around? It's not, but it's unique to this particular situation because of what's allowed by right. So that's sort of that's the things that I hope that the planning commission is allowed to understand.
How do you count impervious surfaces where the mobile home is raised up above the ground and water's able to, I assume, percolate from underneath?
No, it's not supposed to.
Skirted.
Yeah.
A
To
pad
prevent it.
up under the trailer, you're supposed to have under a mobile home, a pad that causes water to shed, so you shouldn't have any
okay.
percolation
No water
directly,
trapped.
not below.
That's right.
the-
So beyond the interior of the skirting, you get no benefit. So it's, the only downside, to that, to doing that is when one moves out and they move another, what I mean? It's just, so it's an effort to try to offset one potential development by doing another one.
Ursula, my comment is that, you know, and I don't think we say this enough. We certainly understand you as the design professional and your colleagues. You know, you work for a client, and the client wants to develop a certain property a certain way, so you have to design it, have to design it to attain compliance to the maximum extent practicable, and go through the process of getting it approved. So we understand and respect that, and realize that you know, the client, you know, they wish what they wish to pursue.
Sure.
PUDs are challenging because if it was strictly R2, R3, B1, B2,
Pretty black and white.
it's very, very black and white. You either meet the criteria or you don't. And then on occasion, we have reasonable variances, or excuse me, reasonable waivers that are granted. A PUD, every aspect of a PUD is subjective.
Sure.
So every aspect of it can be questioned, why you did it a certain way, why you referred to it a certain way. I say all that to say this. What I'd recommend your client be cognizant of and be aware of is, I'll just say that watch the last Planning Commission meeting,
Yeah.
and hear some of the comments on another development very near this one,
Right.
due north of Twin Beach Estates.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that the desires and the rationale that the Planning Commission will evaluate it by, I think that will give a lot of background of how the Planning Commission might approach this particular development. So I think it would be wise to watch that meeting and hear some of those comments. I think you'll hear very similar comments when this one comes before the Planning Commission.
Sure. I appreciate it.
Well, Ursula, we certainly appreciate your time. Any other comments from staff? Any other questions we can answer for you, Ursula?
I don't think so.
Very good. Staff, I say we stand adjourned. We are adjourned. Thank you all.